Andy, but who is that odd-looking creature over there?
I had not noticed.
Well, it's just she's making such a fuss, and she's dragging behind her what looks like... Actually, I think they're both cripples.
Oh, that would be Granny Brand.
Brand? Brand? Not...
Dr. Brand's mother.
Really?
Yes, you'll get to know her. Every few months she comes down from the hills.
Wait, Dr. Brand's mother lives in the hills?
Why, yes. And look, she's bringing with her a couple of lepers today as well.
We have no room. And those poor derelicts, they will never fit the qualifications for the program.
Granny Brand is no respecter of qualifications.
We have no beds. What about procedure?
When Granny Brand arrives, procedures change. Hello, Granny. It's good to see you. Come right in. Go. Make room somewhere. Come on in. And please bring your patients with you.
At the age of 74, Evelyn Brand would let nothing stop her crusade to meet the needs, both physical and spiritual, of her beloved hill people. At least once or twice a year, she would come down from the mountains to Vellore, South India, where her son conducted leprosy research and rehabilitation. If her son Paul were not there, she may employ a high-handed technique, drawing herself up to her full 5 feet, slightly plus, and despite her bag-shaped dress and stringy hair, managed to look like a duchess.
No room? I think you do not know who I am. Dr. Paul Brand is my son, and these are his very special patients.
If Paul were there, she might become sweetly wheedling.
Now look, dear boy, I have quite a lot of patients with me this time.
But Mother, there are no beds.
Oh, you'll find beds. Just tell them it's for your poor, old, sweet mother. Or put them on the floor. Paul, they won't mind.
But
see, this dear boy is begging on the streets because he has nothing else to do. He has paralysis in both hands and feet and ulcers on both feet.
But we do not...
His name is Karuninasan.
Karuninasan received treatment and surgery. He was in the hospital for over a year and found faith in Jesus. He went home with new hands, new feet, and a new knowledge. One of Granny's soldiers for Jesus in those mountains.
Nor were her persuasive tactics confined to that of hospital personnel. On one occasion, when she smuggled a badly deformed leper into a third-class train compartment, a guard endeavoured to evict the undesirable in no uncertain language.
Out, you son of a pig! Get out, you filthy!
Don't you dare touch my patient! I'm taking him to my son, Dr. Brand, in Vellore. Dr. Brand, do you hear?
Meekly, the guard backed away. As Evie approached her 95th birthday, her son Paul expressed,
In her most recent letter to me, my mother expresses a fear that I feel I must pass on to you. She says that her 95th birthday is approaching, and she feels that many kindly people will write to her, praising her that she is at work at such an age. I can just imagine the tear in her eye as she insists.
I am not wonderful. I am but a poor, old, frail, and weak woman. God has taken hold of me, and He uses me. He uses me simply because I know that I have no strength of my own. Please tell the people to praise God, not me.
Evelyn Constant Harris, Evie, born 1879, was one of 11 children.
9 daughters.
9 lovely daughters.
Who must be protected. I must protect them.
Protect them from what, exactly?
Why, my dear, of course, from marriage.
Listen, my dears, it won't be long now before handsome young men start making their vow. If God so ordains it, there is no need to wait, but always be sure that He's chosen your mate.
There's no need to dwell upon empty romance. It's a fool who would wed at the very first chance. Stay home where you're loved, away from all the risk, and beware of the man who away would you whisk.
Evie was born with the eyes and the heart of an artist. It was her mother who led her to the Lord. She painted all her life, but it wasn't until she followed the Lord's leading to India that she saw true beauty at His hand.
But why India?
So many are dying.
But there are opportunities for you to serve God in this city.
I've waited too long already.
All my life, I've provided you with a comfortable home and everything you need. Why leave?
I don't want comfort. I want to go where the gospel is not known.
Those who trust him wholly will find him wholly true.
Mr. Harris was a man who loved his family fiercely, but he was also a man to whom Christ was everything.
In our children, my husband has instilled a passion to know Christ. He himself provided the money for Evie's travel and work.
At the age of 30, she received her marching orders.
She never saw her father again.
1911, she boarded the ship to India. At last, she arrived with eyes lifted to the hills.
I will lift mine eyes unto the hills.
The heat was oppressive.
The lessons in Tamil nearly impossible.
And then there was Jessie.
Jessie Brand. Dr. Jessie Brand.
Now, do not be discouraged. You will learn.
But I'll never pass the exam.
Not with books, but by using the language, like I did. When I arrived in Sendamangalam in 1909, I had to learn. Try doing medical work without an interpreter. One day, a woman came to the dispensary, and she was complaining of a sore throat. Her throat looked fine. Are you sure it's a sore throat? But she was adamant. Sore throat! So I mixed up the medicine, and I offered it to her. But she refused to drink it. At my firm insistence, she finally took it. It wasn't until later that I discovered the sore throat belonged to her baby back home.
August 1913, Evie and Jessie's wedding day.
I've rented 2 dollies so that we will have a proper wedding procession.
The dolly was a rough rectangle of canvas lashed together with 2 bamboo poles, carried on the shoulders of Indian bearers, capable and nimble, but sometimes a little distracted.
So sorry! Everything was ready! As we agreed, but you'll have to delay. The coolies have gone off to hunt a wild pig.
They're hunting? Evie, come sit in the shade. I will go and search for them. And you come with me, my friend.
I am your friend? Whew.
The way will not be easy. It will not be unopposed. So send I you to take 2 souls in bondage, the word of truth that sets the captives free, to break the bonds of sin, to loose death's fetters. So send I you to bring the lost to me.
Evie, we found them, but the weather has turned so bad. Do you suppose that perhaps we should delay?
No, I'm ready now. Let's go home.
All right, let's go. The cold and rain descended. The heat of the plain disappeared as we ascended into those mountains. Cold and soaked to the skin, Evie struggled with that awkward bamboo framework, all the while thorns tearing at her wedding dress. The canvas became a tub, and her dress a sodden tangle. Evie, are you all right?
I'm fine. I needed a bath anyway.
Always looking on the bright side. We came to these mountains for the love of God.
And for the love of the hill people. One of my favorite memories, and one most vivid in my mind, is when Jessie presented us with our prayer book. Not one from a church, but a simple notebook entitled Evie's and My Prayer Book.
Look here. This column will be for prayer requests, and this one for praise, when the prayers have been answered.
Life in the mountains held none of the purity and romance many would ascribe to civilization untainted by the West.
No schools existed. 1 in 3 children survived the deadly scourge of malaria.
Monogamy had long since been discarded for need of more farm workers. A young toddler boy would often be married to a teenage girl so she could work on the farm. More children meant more workers. Thus, disease spread and evil was prevalent.
A husband would not mind parting with his wife for a good price.
Animism was the religion.
The priest or Busari was greatly feared. When called upon in times of sickness or trouble, his frenetic and crude rituals had the villagers in terrorized allegiance.
Children, unwanted and discarded by their parents, gravitated towards Evelyn.
I remember sitting with one ragged little boy as he tended the cows. My Tamil was very poor, but I managed to teach him a simple prayer. Forgive my sins and make me thy child. It was weeks before I saw him again, and he was dying of pneumonia. How could I let him go like this? Did he remember what I had taught him? Could he repeat it? Yes. Forgive my sins and make me thy child. My one first little convert left me sorrowing, but assured that he was free where the Lord carries his lambs in his bosom.
July 1914, Paul was born.
Paul Brand, our son.
The baby was the open door that Evelyn had been praying for. Women came from miles around to see her care for her child.
See, boil water over fire, not make baby sick. Put baby to sleep under netting, cloth with holes. Keep mosquito, kisu out. Kisu give baby a fever. Pavoom, bad.
Still, the Busari resisted.
Medicine? Yes. But preaching? No. No Collie Hill man has ever broken caste to follow your way. It has never happened, and it never will.
He's threatening the village.
And he has taken many patients.
He's ambushed the schools.
And he is our neighbor.
The book.
Yes. Praise for help with surgery.
Prayer for Busari.
Praise for our love.
Home.
Eggs.
Milk and butter.
Praise for Evie's progress with Tamil.
Prayer for the recovery of the cow.
And prayer for medicine.
Lord, I pray that you would convert Busari or remove him from spoiling thy work.
To Evie, her husband was a marvel. Doctor, preacher, teacher, agriculturalist, naturalist, scholar.
He reads books on relativity.
Another day he'd been reading Carlyle's French Revolution or Bunyan's Grace Abounding.
Not only a saint, but a genius.
Together they taught gardening, farming, and livestock. The hill people grew to love them.
Extracting teeth.
Banishing worms.
Attacking malaria.
Delivering babies.
Stitching.
Cleaning.
And dressing.
Dr. Paul Brown would later write of his parents.
Whatever my parents lacked in education, they made up for it in their understanding of compassion, a word whose Latin etymology means to suffer with. This was my father's instinctive response to all things related to medicine.
By 1916,
3 schools established.
With 50 scholars.
And Connie.
A sister for Paul.
1919.
They want us to take a furlough.
It has been 6 years.
With no converts, but for my one little boy. Will they let us return?
They want converts, members on a church roll. How can they understand that even so, we are giving new life to these people?
We must stay.
Mother Brand, have you heard? Busari and his wife are sick with a terrible demon.
Influenza.
Please, you must take my baby. Do not give him to the hill people. If I die, you may have my house and my lands. If I live, I will praise God. All the Swami have deserted me. Only one left helping is you, servant of Yesu Swami. He must be true God.
The Busari died calling on the name above all names.
We'll name the baby Ruth.
Another school, 1,000 patients.
1 more convert.
10 years they've been on the hills.
It's time for a furlough.
We're going home.
But Mummy, this is home.
Yes, it is.
If I'm not there to put the mats out for the chapel service, who's going to?
Even as we traveled to England, Evie was filled with dread at the thought of leaving our children behind when the furlough ended. The day came. The children were to go to school. We knelt to pray together as a family one last time.
watch my children leave, something within me died.
O afflicted, and tossed with tempest, and not comforted, I will lay your stones with fair colors, and your foundation with sapphire. Great will be the peace of thy children. Your children will be taught of God.
Years later, with both children on the mission field, I marveled at the truth of that promise. Has he not fulfilled his words to this tempest-tossed woman and allowed me to see in my children the peace that he has prepared for them?
For Paul and Connie, letters home were a treasure.
Mother was bitten by a snake 3 feet long.
Wow. I took Mother to that terrible peak I told you of some months ago, climbed to the very peak and looked out over the abyss. Mama lay down flat and just crawled to the edge of the stone that hung over the precipice while I held onto her skirts to keep the wind from carrying her over. We saw big apes, not monkeys, and they were climbing along by the tiniest cracks in the rock, while below them was nothing but a sheer drop into the black void. Wow.
We have been watching the building of a marvelous house. The architect and engineer is a large hornet. The house is suspended from the underside of a rafter in our veranda.
How could one expect children to resign themselves to a stuffy English classroom when adventures and climbing and the wonders of nature were leaping off the page from a letter from their father?
School reports were consistent.
Good. Bien, très bien. Most original, artistic.
Poor, 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 fair, poor, could do better in French.
Paul, you'll never pass.
I'd excel in other ways.
He did excel in less admirable activities. In the third-story classroom where they studied, Paul would sit in the back. He would open the window and then crawl to the ground, running around the building and re-entering the classroom to once again greet his baffled teacher.
My darling girlie cannot write a long letter this week because a rise in temperature is just coming on. Do you remember how you and Paul used to sit on my back during the ague stage? I suppose you've grown so big nowadays that to sit on my back would squash me flat.
That was the last letter my husband would ever write to his children.
June 18th, 1929. Jesse suffered a severe bout with blackwater fever and died. I suppose the mourning was so great that it would have reached the very portals of heaven. It was the hill people that mourned. Evie was too broken, too dazed.
We were but one, so when the sun shone on us, it shone on one. And when the rains came, it was just the same. It rained on one, it fell on one. And when he withheld from us, 'twas ever thus. We were but one to feel the miss of any bliss under the sun. And then the storm came, the cold and bitter weather. But it hurt us not, for we were one together. And when he was taken away, there was nothing left but a heart bereft. No one to share, no one to care. No, he who took him is here. No one by my side, but he is my guide.
Evelyn did not forsake the work. Instead, she forsook all fear.
She clung to the vision that Jesse had given his life for.
A few months before he died, Jesse and I climbed to the crest at Pulliam Petty, where we could see all 5 peaks: the Collies, the Calorins, the Pakai, the Pariamalai, and the Cheateries. All 5 of them, he said. Do you hear, Evie? Before we die, we must win all 5 of them for Christ.
After time in England with her children, Evie prepared to return to the hills.
Evelyn, we don't think it wise to send you back.
But I must go back.
The mission has made their decision.
But the work is overflowing, and the people expect me.
It is agreed.
But the building...
Now, as far as finances
Wait,
go...
my father's supervision has funded the building and all other costs.
It's not just about the
I
finance.
must go back.
You can't!
I must.
One term, Evelyn. One term.
One turn. A very long turn.
Miles and miles she walked every day.
She only traveled by third-class train.
That's where the people are.
World War II was coming closer and closer to India, but her only concern was for her children. Back in England, Paul, now a doctor himself, was working round the clock to help victims of the Blitz. All the while, bombs falling outside.
Finally, the war ended. Both Connie and Paul got married, and for the first time, Evie was called Granny.
During a final furlough in England, many thought that she would retire.
They thought that she was too old to work.
Too old? Why, none of them have been on a camping trip with me recently. Too old. Let them try and ride 10 or 12 miles a day. Why, I'm only 68 years old.
Only 1 year this time, Evelyn. 1 year!
1947, Evelyn returned to India.
That same year, Dr. Paul Brown paid a memorable visit to a leprosy sanatorium in India. This short journey changed his life and that of thousands of others. Paul was the first physician to appreciate that leprosy wasn't simply the rotting away of tissues, but that the loss of sensation of pain made sufferers more susceptible to injury. His pioneer rehabilitation and surgery changed the treatment of leprosy across the world.
And later that year,
This lamp is presented to Miss Evelyn Brand in honor of her retirement from missionary service.
A hurricane lantern would have been of more use in the hills. The Calorans, the Collies, and the Cheeries. I'm coming, Jessie. I'm finally coming.
And let nothing stop her.
Granny Brand retired to the hills.
Life begins at 70.
Between 1947 and 1967, 20 years, 15 came, 2 stayed.
How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe except they hear? And how shall they hear except there be a preacher? And how shall they preach except they be sent? So send I you my strength to know in weakness, my joy in grief, my perfect peace in pain, to prove my power, my grace, my promised presence. So send I you eternal fruit to gain.
At age 80, heartache, failure, and slow progress did not daunt her. In the 60s and 70s, a new enemy emerged.
Ganja.
Marijuana.
We must replace the devil's cultivation with God's cultivation.
She ordered 1,000 pineapple shoots. She wrote a letter to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi.
You must intervene.
She marched into government offices.
This must stop.
Nothing stopped her.
Bed rest? Why, that fall only broke a few ribs. I can still ride my pony.
Sacrifice?
The only real sacrifice I have ever had to make was leaving my children.
Self-denial?
Living in these glorious hills? I would hate to live in those awful cities.
A night in a hotel?
A useless extravagance.
When dressing and washing a stinking gangrenous foot of an Indian, women stood at the door with cloths held to their noses.
Why, of course the smell is awful, but why stand around holding our noses when God has so much work for us to do?
Evie was always pleading with some young doctor.
Dr. Lister, you must come and help.
When she looked at you, it felt like she looked right through you.
The need is so great.
But she was happier and more alive than anyone I'd ever met.
Lord, I pray that you would open his young eyes to the possibilities.
The need was the call.
Dr. Lister was the first physician that many had seen on the 5 mountain ranges.
Here in these mountains, I am convinced that I am at the very center of God's will for my life.
Mother, you have help now. Why not come and live with us in Valor? Even the best of people do retire sometimes in their 70s.
But what is the use of preserving my old body if it's not going to be used where the Lord needs me?
Already, she had endured several cracked ribs, pressure on her spinal nerves, a brain concussion, a cracked femur, and a severely infected hand.
At age 93,
I suppose I'll stop riding the pony. I keep falling off.
devoted Indian villagers would carry her from place to place.
At 94, she could not raise herself to a standing position without help. She would walk with the use of 2 bamboo poles, and with them, she would cart herself across all kinds of terrain.
You can't expect me to sit around and do nothing.
5 mountain ranges were evangelized.
The last memory I have of my mother is a vivid one. She is sitting in a village in the mountains that she loves, on a low stone wall that circles the town. All around her, faces are gazing up at her, intently listening to her every word. She is telling them about Jesus. I know that even with my relative youth and expertise in medicine and agricultural techniques, I could never command the kind of devotion she has. Deep, searching questions come from the crowd, and they hang on her every word. They are looking right through her wrinkled tissues, past her old face. All they see is lambent spirit. To them, she is beautiful.
Now, first of all, dear children, make sure of your love for Christ.
At age 95, she was buried, upon request, in a well-used sheet.
No coffin. She abhorred the idea of good wood being used as a coffin.
Her treasure was where her heart was, and her heart was in the work that God had given her to do.
Jesse and I stood together when the Kusari faced us and said, "Never will a Kali Hillman break caste and follow your way. It has never happened, and it never will." Our simple answer was that God can and will bring every man, woman, and child of the hills to himself.